Hello everyone. Today we're going to go through a small little tutorial to get you started for the workshop. This workshop will be held through the Denver Art Museum for my creative art in residence, and I wanted to give everybody a chance to go through at their own pace and maybe get a little bit ahead. This tutorial will show you how to link Quixel's megascan library into the Unreal Engine using a plugin. So let's go ahead and dive in. After you have installed the Quixel Bridge, you're going to need to download and install the plugin. This will probably happen to you guys by default after you download your first 3D model. So let's go ahead and go into here. Once you download your first 3D model, you're thinking, how can I get this into Unreal? Well, if we go over to our export settings and scroll down, this will probably be grayed out for you guys because you need to download and install a plugin. You'll need to select the version. Following the directions that we'll have in our blog, you'll download and install Unreal version 4.25. So the first thing you need to do is select the version. The next thing you'll need to do is give it an installation folder. I'll put a link to the correct location for this plugin, but if you're curious, it is in your program files in the Epic Engine games. In the version, you'll find an engine folder and then in plugins. And once you select that and you download and install, it will be able to activate when we open Unreal again. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into Unreal. We're going to start with a blank project. So the first thing you want to do is click on your Unreal icon. And it's going to take a moment depending on the type of computer you have. And we're going to start out with games. You can do film, you can do architecture. That's what's really cool about this program. The use case for it is very versatile, but for now we're just going to do game because we can create a third-person character to run around the environment. We don't need this third-person character, but I always feel that it's nice because it helps us with scale, seeing how big and small different objects are in relation to a general humanoid character. So we're going to hit next. And this is pretty important as well. So this area right here, we're going to need to remember for our bridge. So I have a folder set up already for this tutorial, and we're going to name this Tut with the Denver Art Museum. So create project. So this is the famous third-person template. When you're making a lot of games with Unreal, I find that I have started out in this template quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and delete a lot of this because we're not going to need it for our case. So we're going to go ahead and just delete all this stuff, but we're going to leave the basic lighting just to give us a little bit of a start. The next thing we want to do is we want to get this megascan plugin set up. I already have it set up, so that's why you see it here. On your version, when you first open, this will not be here, but that's okay. We're going to help you get that set up. The next thing you're going to want to do is go into Edit, and then there's a section here called Plugins. If you type in Plugins, you'll get this pop-up window. So once you open up this panel, we're going to go into Built-in, and in our search, we're going to type in megascan. And see, mine is already enabled, but when you open yours, this will not be enabled. So go ahead and click that. And when you do, it'll probably ask you to restart. So go ahead and restart the program. And we'll jump back into this empty scene. So once everything opens back up, let's go back into Bridge because we need to tell where we want these assets to export. And if you remember we set our initial project in a specific place. So if we go into here, I set my project in this, on this drive, in here, in tutorials, and here. And we go into content. Content is the folder where basically all of your 3D models and textures and animations and code, they'll all be in this content folder. So now that we've made that link, we should be able to go ahead and jump back into Bridge, and this little blue export, when we click export, as we see here, it's exporting to Unreal, and it looks like it exported successfully. So now this is really convenient and nice. When we go back into Unreal, it's already importing, so we don't have to deal with that sort of process. I'll show you how to import things in custom later, but for now we have our big rock just already ready to go in the environment, which is super nice. I think that this is so incredibly helpful. I have been playing around with 3D modeling surfaces as well as video game platforms for quite some time, and this process is super streamlined and easy. And the fact that we now have access to a vast library of awesome assets. I mean, look at this. We can go to just 3D assets, and there's just lists and lists of wonderfully beautiful photogrammetry and possibly even laser scanned 3D objects that are yours to use for free when using Unreal Engine 4, which is also free. It's a really amazing ecosystem that's being created for digital artists. So let's jump back in. Let's talk a little bit about the basics. I'm sure the first thing that I had a hard time with, and I'm sure you will have a hard time with, is navigating the digital camera that is in the environment. So let's go through a couple different ways to move around the camera. The first one, if you hold Alt and then click the middle mouse wheel of your mouse, you can move right to left. This is called a pan. If you use the right click button and hold down, you rotate. Another helpful one is if you hold Alt and left click, you rotate around the object you have selected. So those are the major ways to move around. Another useful way of moving around is if you hold Alt and right click, you zoom in and out. And this is a very helpful one as well. And if you hold just the left button, left click on your mouse, you can move like you were walking around. So as you click and face the direction of the camera and move your mouse forward, you can move in the direction that the camera is facing. And this is very useful for things like hallways or roads or things like that. So those are the basics. So let's go ahead and recap. The first one is middle mouse click, which pans. The second one is right click, which rotates. The third one is Alt left click, which rotates around an object, and then just holding click and moving left click and moving the mouse around lets you do a fly through movement. So those are the basics of the controls. Another really handy control. This is one of my favorites. Let's say you've really zoomed out and you're confused on where you want to go, but you want to focus on this rock. You can click on this rock and then hit F, and you'll frame up on that rock again. So those are the basics of the camera controls. Let's talk a little bit more about what's going on around the screen. There's a lot going on around the screen, so let's go ahead and talk about each little section along the way. The first things to get familiar with is the navigation down here. This navigation area is where all of your assets, models, textures, sounds, all the things that you want to add into the project are going to show up here. And it's kind of like your folder system on your computer. Basically, you have folders, and the more you click into a folder, as you can see, this directory changes. So you can go back in the directory, you can go forward in the directory, or you can go all the way back to the main directory or folder area. The next thing that is super useful is all of these place actors and the different features that you can add in. So let's say we wanted to add in a cube. We could go to basics or even geometry, and let's bring in a spiral stair. So you click and drag into the environment, and now we've got a spiral staircase. I'm going to delete that for now because I want to keep this environment very, very open. But if you wanted to get a different effect, also a different type of camera, and most often different types of lights, over here to your left is where you're going to find all those different elements that you can bring into a scene. And lastly, and definitely pretty important, is your hierarchy. This hierarchy is a list of all the things that are in this scene or environment right now. So let's go ahead and bring in something like a point light. We bring in this point light, and sure enough, it pops up in this hierarchy. You can rename this by going to Edit, Rename. So, sorry, I right-clicked, Edit, Rename, and let's call this First Light. And let's say you had a bunch of these point lights. Here's another really fun tip. When you hold Alt and click on one of these arrows, you can duplicate the object you have selected multiple times. So let's go ahead and say, hey, I like these 3 lights and I want them to be grouped. I want these to be my first lights. What you can do is select all of the lights you would like, or objects, or scripts. It doesn't matter. You can select multiple things in your hierarchy, right-click, and say group. This is super, super helpful. I also can just hit Control-G and group. This is a way to keep things contained and also make things a little bit easier to deal with, because if you can imagine, once you start adding a bunch of things into this environment, you're going to get a pretty long hierarchy. In fact, something that I really like to do is right-click on a blank area and create a folder. And I'm going to call this folder my first lights. And then I can take these and see when I select one, because they're grouped, I select all of them, and I can go ahead and just drag this by right-clicking and dragging and place them into my folder. And then I can close this, and now I'm saving real estate in this screen. And it's really helpful, and I find that when I'm really getting confused on where things are, I take a little bit of time and put things in folders and group them. It just makes your life a little bit easier. But for now, we're going to go ahead and delete those lights because we're going to keep this scene pretty blank for now. Another thing that is very useful are the features that are underneath the hierarchy when an object is selected. These are all the properties of that object. And we'll be using this for things like the color of the lights. We'll also use this for the type of objects and when we're applying materials to specific objects. But we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, I just wanted to show you guys that this is kind of the area where you can control a specific object. So if we wanted to change the scale, or we wanted to change the rotation, or we wanted to change the location. These are all elements that can be affected in this little panel. And so let's say you wanted to do some of this stuff, but you wanted to do it a little bit quicker without having to tamper with all of these numbers. There are the different handles for each object that will allow you to rotate, scale, and move, or transform. So for this case, transform or move, you can hit W, and it will bring up these arrows in the X, Y, and Z direction. And when you hover over one of these handles, it will change color. And that means that is the handle that you'll be selecting, and you'll be able to move about that axis. So let's go ahead and click this axis and move up and down. And you can see as it highlights and we click and move up and down, we can actually change the position of this object. And we can do the same thing with rotation. So you can either hit E, the letter E on your keyboard, and this is a shortcut for your rotation handle, or in the top right of your screen, you can click this rotation icon. And now it's the same thing. When you hover over an axis, it turns yellow, and that's the axis that when you click and hold, you can edit the object in that way. And lastly, for scale, you can hit R, or you can click the icon in the top right corner, and this will allow you to scale the object. You can scale it on an individual axis, or if you want to scale it uniformly, which means scale it the same way it is, you can click in the middle, and as you can see when you click in the middle or hover over in the middle, all of those axes handles turn yellow. That means when I click and drag, I'll be affecting all of those axes. And so those are the super basics, which will kind of get you a little bit familiar with how to maneuver around the environment and also how to affect objects. And so now that we kind of got a little bit of the basic controls, let's start adding stuff to the scene. The first thing I want to do is add a terrain. And the terrain is basically the ground. Think of it like the ground. And what's really cool about the terrain is it's sculptable. So if we go up to the top panel, we see here modes. If we click modes, we get this landscape feature. So when we click landscape, you'll get this cool grid that pops up. This grid it's pretty complicated because it has a lot to do with video game rendering. But for now, we're going to do something very simple. So let's go ahead and do the smallest, which is a 7x7 grid, which is a very small area, but that's all we need for this demo. And we'll go ahead and hit create. And so now we've got this checkered area. And as you notice, there's this sort of light purple circle that is moving around where your cursor is. Well, if we look up to the top, it looks like we are in sculpt mode. And we can also go into paint mode, and also we can manage some of the technical features about the terrain. But for now, we're just going to go into the sculpt. The first thing to notice about the sculpting are these variables to the left. We've got the tool strength, the brush size, and also the brush fall off. The strength is, as you would imagine, the intensity of how the brush affects the ground. The other is brush size, which will change the radius or change the circumference of the area in which is affected by the brush. And lastly, the fall off is the amount of feathering for the edge. So now that we kind of know what these do off to the side, let's go into Sculpt and see what happens when we click. When we click and drag, we start to affect the height of the landscape. So with this, we can go ahead and create some ground and some hills and a little bit of difference in height on the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and do so. The cool thing about this is if once we bring in some 3D models and do our lighting, we want to change some of the way this terrain looks, we absolutely can. It's a really, really versatile way of using these sculpting brushes to create some interesting dynamic in the floor and the ground plane. I'm going to go ahead and change the brush size a little bit, get a little bit bigger, but turn down the intensity. Because when the brush gets bigger, it also changes the intensity. So just something that I've noticed helps. If you make the brush bigger, take a look at the intensity. Okay, cool. So we got a little bit of nice looking terrain. So it's a little bumpy, but nothing too crazy. I'm just going to move everything up around the edges. That way we don't see any straight lines. Because that is one thing you'll notice, and I've had a couple really good teachers tell me, is in nature there are no straight lines. Everything is slightly bendy. So it's always a good idea to, while doing something natural, to try to limit the amount of straight lines in the environment. Cool. So at this point, now that we've created a landscape, let's go ahead and see if the player can walk around. So we've got the player, and I just clicked play. And when I click in the environment, I can use the WASD buttons to walk around. And now we've got a character that can walk around our new environment. And I really like to use this character to judge scale. I think it's very, very helpful to see how big things are in relation to a humanoid character. So let's say you're done with this and you want to go back to editing, just hit escape. And once you hit escape, we go out of play mode. So to show you again, to play the character, go ahead and hit play. And when you do so, click in the screen. And now, as you can see, the mouse disappears. And now when you rotate your camera, you look around the character. And when you hit W, A, S, or D, you can move forward, sideways, or backwards. And then hit escape. So those are kind of the really simple basics of landscape. And I think what I really want to do is start showing you how quickly things can get very interesting with the Bridge and Megascan library. So now that we have that Bridge live link set up, it becomes super easy to add in a bunch of really cool objects. Oh, another thing, while you're in this tool, I've had this happen a couple times. I'm like, oh man, I want to move this object, but I'm in Sculpt. So what you have to do is go back into modes and then select. And now you can click this and move it around and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take this rock, I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to scale it in the opposite and then merge it back together. And then that way, now this rock is a mirror image of itself. And if you remember the last time, we can group things. So I want to group these. So I highlight both of them and hit Control G. And now this object will move together. So whenever I select one of these, if I want to rotate it or scale it, now they will scale and rotate together, which is very helpful. And I was kind of enjoying this idea of a big floating rock. So we're going to go ahead and go with it. Right now we have a big floating rock. Okay. So now we can go back into Bridge, and I was kind of wanting something different on that ground. Right now we have this checkered pattern, and though it's very useful for understanding the difference in height and the change in height, I kind of want something a little more natural. So let's go into Bridge, and we'll go into Surfaces. So surfaces you can think of like textures or colors and different ways of shine that can be applied to surfaces. And I want something for the ground. I've went ahead and pre-downloaded this. So if you want to download this specific one, go ahead and download. You do so by hovering over the texture you want and clicking download. But go ahead and pause this and download this texture. So after you get this texture downloaded, or any of the wonderful assortment of other textures, we're going to go ahead and hit export. And because we've set up the link in export settings to go to the specific folder you'd like it to go to, it exports successfully. And we can go back into Unreal and it starts to import. Cool. So now that it has imported, we see that it's right here. Now this is super helpful because without getting into too much complicated shader graphs, what it's done is it's connected all these different maps into one material. And this material is made up of a color map, an ambient occlusion map, a displacement map, a normal map, and a roughness map. And basically what all these different maps combined together, they tell the computer how to calculate the light correctly so that it looks like it would in real life. So I drag and drop this onto the terrain, or with the terrain selected, I can go into its material and drag and drop that material in there. And as we can see, it showed up, but it's super tiled. And that's okay. We can go ahead and fix that. Also, another thing that I'm going to do, as you can see, there's some of these check mark boxes. Let's go ahead and go into light source. And we're going to change this to movable. And what this does basically says calculate the light in real time instead of baking the light. And if you'd like, we can get more into that at a later tutorial. But for now, go ahead and go into light source and change it to movable. So let's click back on our terrain and go into our material, and we're going to double click this material. And what will pop up is a second window. And this is where we can go and edit our material a little more. So I'm going to kind of make this a little smaller so I can see this window and also the window in our environment. I'm going to kind of edit this a little bit. And so what you see here is tiling. And this tiling happens because the way this material is set up is so that it can repeat infinitely and it blends on all the sides. But since we don't want to see that tiling because we're going to be close to this material, we can go into here and click tiling. And by changing these values, we can change the type of tiling. So if let's say the texture was really, really big and we needed to bring the tiles down, we could do that. Or in our case, since the object is really big, we can make the tiling even smaller to get something that looks a little less tiled. And we'll go with something like that. So let's go with 0.83. I think that works perfectly. So make sure to save before we click out. So we'll hit save and close this out. And now we've got a ground that looks a little better. And we'll go ahead and add some more stuff on top of this. So this won't be the end. But for now, we've got a ground that looks way less tiled and is starting to give us a natural vibe. So hit escape, and now we can go back out and edit. But this isn't enough. Let's add some more stuff. So we'll go back into Bridge, and we can go into 3D assets. And at this point, I want you guys to pause the video and go through and start picking different 3D models that you want to add to your environment. I have a bunch that are already downloaded, and The ones that you have downloaded, when you click local on the left side of Bridge, it will bring up all the different models that you have downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and export a couple different models, and then we're going to start playing with them. And now that I have a fair amount of models, I think it would be good for us to, at this point, save. So hit Save All, and this will be a list of all the things that you imported, and we want to make sure that we save that. So we say Save Selected, and then we go and say Save Current. There we go. Now we've got everything saved. And we're all feeling a little more comfortable now because if it crashes, hey, we have everything saved. So once you import all the things that you like, and we may go and import more as we go, but for now, we'll play with what we have. So in content, you'll see that now we have a megascans library or a megascans folder. So if we click that folder and we go into 3D assets, now we have all those assets that we just downloaded. So I know that I kind of want those stairs to lead up to this rock. I think that would be fun. So we're going to go ahead and drag and drop those into the scene and then hit F to line ourselves up. And I envisioned these stairs being a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and scale by hitting R and select this and bring them out a little bit. And since I want them to lead up to this staircase, or lead up to this rock, I'm going to kind of flip them around and move them a little bit. And this is where the ability to, well, I'm going to make this 180 just to be aligned. There we go. And this is where I was saying some of the ability to edit terrain as you go is super useful. So we've got this space underneath these stairs, and we don't want people to be able to see under them. So we can actually go in to our terrain again. So Modes, Landscape, and Sculpt. And we can actually go in here and sculpt this ground to match the ramp of that staircase. Here we go. This is a perfect example. So, oops, I accidentally did a little bit too much on this sculpt. So what I can do is hold Shift and subtract. Perfect. There we go. And we can do that a little bit more just to make sure everything sets in really nicely. And then once again, we can change the size of the brush. Go ahead and hit Shift again and pull that a little bit away. And then I'm going to use the flatten tool just to make this area a little bit flatter. And maybe pull that down a little bit. And then make this area just a little bit flatter and flatten everything out. Cool. So now we've got those stairs there. And I feel like because there's stairs, actually, you know what? This is a little crazy, but so we go back into Mode, select. Let's pull this rock back a little bit and up a little bit. I want a second flight of stairs. So what we can do is click, hold Alt, and then select this arrow, and now we've duplicated it. Let's do a second flight. Let's make sure it lines up flat first. So hit F, and we line up real fast. Then we know that that's about flat, and let's have it be about there. So we can go ahead and do the same. Go back into Modes, Landscape, and now let's go back into Sculpt, and we can hold Shift again and remove some of that ground. Oops, that was a little too much. And if we use flatten, there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. And then make this brush a lot smaller, and we can start to be really nitpicky. Oops, I put a hole in the ground. There we go. That's a little better. Use the smooth to smooth it out. Maybe give a little bit more. And then we can use the smooth to smooth it out. Oh, we got to build up here. And then let's take our brush and make it a lot bigger. So we just want to pop up this whole area. Cool. Now we've got something looking kind of mystical. Cool. Got these stairs leading up to this weird floating rock. Okay, and so let's go ahead and place some more things. So back into Megascan. This time I want this beam. I'm thinking kind of like sometimes see, I did it again. We go into Modes, select, and now we can select that. Oops. I feel like most cool mystical areas kind of have like the Stonehenge effect. So I'm going to bring this up here. Rotate it a little bit. I'm going to take this beam and do the same thing we did with the rock. Hold Alt, move it over. But this time, instead of scaling it opposite, I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it all the way around 180. And then click this again and hit Control G, because I want to group those together. And we're going to place these around this floaty rock. Just kind of, rotate them here and there. Hit F, make sure that they're in the ground, but not too far under the ground. And then I'm going to hold Alt and move them over. Duplicate them. hold Alt again. And if you notice, see how there's two of those handles selected? That means it'll move on both the X and the Y. So if I hold Alt and click, now it moves only isolated to those two axes. I'm going to go ahead and move this down a little bit. And then maybe bring a couple more right there. Rotate it a little bit. Right there. Move that a little bit. We'll kind of space these out a little more evenly. There we go. Let's make sure that these are in the ground. We'll just rotate these a little bit. That way they don't all have the same rotation. Nice. Now we have sort of a mystical floating rock. Oh, see, that one's not all the way in the ground. Let's go ahead and get that in the ground. Cool. So let's see what else. We downloaded some cliffs. Let's see. I think these cliffs actually will go really nicely behind. So I'm going to scale these up. And we might have to get some other cliffs as well to match. But this is what's fun. Start to build the composition with these free assets that we were able to download. Oh, that's that rock. Maybe we'll add some more. See, this is what's so great about it. It's like, I know I need some more cliff rocks, so I can go to Bridge and go into my local and see if I have some other cliff stuff. Oh, look, that's perfect. Let's go ahead and download that. Export it successfully. Go back into here. Perfect. And let's go ahead and drag that in. And drag that in. Cool. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Oops. And right now, things are looking a little bit symmetrical, but that's okay. I think it'll work for this sort of composition where there's something very central. Oops. Delete that one. I accidentally duplicated that. So we'll hit Alt, duplicate, and then this time we're going to do the same thing. We're going to scale opposite direction so it flips into a mirror. And we'll set this over here. Maybe we'll make this one just a little bit taller. That way it doesn't look completely symmetrical. Make this one a little bigger too. Cool. And one thing that I'm already starting to notice is that these two rocks are different colors. So to fix that, let's go into this rock and we'll go into its material, double click the material. And as we see here, we can change a little bit of the color. So if we click this and do this override, we should be able. Oh, if that doesn't work, this is what I do a lot as well. It changes things, but it's okay. For now, we're just going to go ahead and do a little bit of the hacky version. So I know that its color is pulling from this texture. So if we double click this texture, we can go in and change its properties like we would in Photoshop. So I know that it needs to be darker. So instead of going up, I need to go down. So let's do 0.3. Let's try that first. Hit enter. Then it's going to change the color a little bit, make it a little bit darker. And let's give it a little more saturation. Just see if we can get some of that red tone. 1.3. There we go. Now it's starting to match a little bit more. Not perfect, but hey, for the sake of this tutorial, it shows you how to edit the textures. Cool. So we've got something going on here that's looking kind of magical. So I feel like we need some of the lighting to match that. So this is one of my favorite things to do, and you see it in a lot of video games, but I really like it. So what we're going to do is go into our place actors, and we're going to find Exponential Height Fog. So in the search, go ahead and type in X. There it is. Perfect. We're going to drag and drop it into the scene. And as you can see, we're already starting to get a nice little haze. And we can really see this when we bump up the density. So if we did something extreme like 0.1, now we're really getting some cool fog. And we can keep going with that too. If we went to like 1, now it looks very, very much like something in Middle Earth. But let's tone it down. Something like 0. Let's still make it intense, 0.5. Really intense. And we'll go ahead and this is also really important, is turn on volumetric fog. It's going to cost a little bit more if you're doing video games, but since we're just doing it for looks, we're going to turn that on. And what this does, without getting too far into it, is it uses the light to calculate the fog as a volume instead of a just general overlay mist. And this can really be seen by doing something like this. So if we go into our lights and get a spotlight, we're going to pump this spotlight up a little bit, but we'll sort of get those rays that happen when there's particulate in the air. So if we go like this and bump up the strength of this, go into volumetric scattering and attenuation, make it extend a lot further. We can start to get some of those rays of light that poke through. So first, let's make sure that these are emitting shadows. Cast shadows, they are. Well, for now, we'll just go ahead and delete that. But that's kind of what volume does, is it starts to introduce a volumetric light calculation with your lights. So we've got a very moody scene at this point. Actually, I kind of liked the way that those lights were working, so we're going to bring some point lights in. And we're going to have these point lights just kind of hovering above. Cool. And let's say these aren't bright enough, and we don't want to go in and individually change their brightness. You can select multiple of them, and then go in to the panel below the hierarchy and change their intensity. So let's go to something like 10. That's not enough. Let's do something like 30. Nice. Now we've got a cool sort of glowing effect happening around our mystical flying rock. Cool. So let's go ahead and play and see what it looks like. So as we go up these stairs and we look around, that's a nice size. It seems very monolithic. Cool. So we'll go ahead and hit escape. And I think that since everything else is lit up, maybe this rock up here needs a light hovering above it as well. But let's make this one a little brighter. And maybe we'll make it a fun color. Let's try a green. And we'll increase its attenuation radius. And let's bump that up a little bit. Nice. Let's try some other colors. Maybe yellow. I'm kind of liking an orange because it really sets out against the sort of pale blue. Cool. And I think that the fog is just a little bit too intense. So let's go back into our atmospheric fog. Or no, our exponential height fog. See, this is what, so we've got all these different pillars, right? Let's go ahead and make a folder for them. So we'll click them all and say move to, create a new folder, and we're going to call them pillars. And then now we can drop this down, and we still have a lot in there. So maybe we'll clean some of this up. There it is, exponential height fog. So let's turn this down to something like 0.33. That's a little better. We'll go with that for now. Oops. And the cool thing about exponential height fog is we can actually change kind of where it sits in the landscape. Let's do something like that. Yeah, that's looking pretty cool. We can also, what I really like to do as well, is use a newer feature called atmospheric sky. Or sky atmosphere. Let's drop that in. And this is really interesting. If you get into the technical aspects, you can actually create the physical type of atmosphere for a specific size of planet, which is really cool. So this kind of changes the way the atmosphere is. Cool. Well, we'll do something like that for now. Let's see what other assets we have. I think I had some cool a cool tree. Yeah, let's go ahead and drag that in. Thought these would be cool to bring back here. Like these big old trees that were growing around this rock, because this rock is a energy source. So it only makes sense that there used to be a tree there. There used to be a couple trees there when this rock was emitting the massive amounts of energy. Now it's a little depleted. We can see that it's depleted, especially because these trees are dead. But at one time, I'll tell you what, this rock had so much energy. Cool. And another thing that helps as well is, let's say you want to get rid of these little icons. You can hit G and it hides them or brings them back. Cool. Let's delete that thing. Don't need that. Awesome. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and add some more foliage. I think this needs some trees or plants. Let's see what we have in Bridge. So we go into 3D plants, and I've got a few. Once again, go ahead and find the ones you like and download them. For now, I'm going to export in some of these plants. As we see here, it's importing all of these LODs. These LODs are super important when you're making video games. If you've ever played a video game and you're running along and you see trees or buildings or other sort of things in the environment snap in or snap out, those are the LODs. And that is a really helpful way to save on rendering resources. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video for you viewers, but I'm going to set dress this and you can kind of see how I work. Okay, so basically at this point, I've gone ahead and populated the scene with a bunch of little foliage and some rocks, and played a little bit with the lighting. And I think that for the sake of this demo, this is good to go. So I wanted to show you the last little thing to do if you wanted to get a little image of what you're looking at your screen. So I've been kind of playing around, looking at different angles, seeing what type of shots could work. But I think since this is such like a monolithic type of view, I wanted it to be pretty center punched. So I kind of cropped into what I think would be a pretty good image. And so the last thing to do is to grab a little render. And the best way to do that is, so there's a key on your keyboard called a tilde. It also looks like a wavy thing. If you click that, you'll bring up this little command line. And then if you type in high res shot and click this, once you hit enter, it will save it as a high-res shot. You can also hit space and do 1, 2, or 3, and that will be a degree of resolution. So if I do 2, it'll be a 2K image. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and hit enter. And you see here, it shows you where you save that. So once you click that, you can go to your folder where it saved it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple different shots just to see which one I end up choosing. So once again, hit tilde. Actually, before I do that, I want to move over just a little bit. Something like that. So then we do high res shot space 2, hit enter, and then we can click this and get our other shot. And then I want to do one that's kind of far away. Get as much of the map as we can. There we go. And something like that. So tilde, high res shot, and then 2. And then at that point, that concludes our mini tutorial. I'll be doing something very similar for the workshop. So feel free to poke your head in if you want to get a head start. Download and install all of these tools, and I will catch you guys later. Thanks. Bye.